At this time, I would like to introduce today's first guest speaker, Captain Adrian Veseth-Nelson. Captain Veseth-Nelson, a West Point, United States Military Academy graduate, served in the United States Army for 7 years and retired as a highly decorated captain. Between his deployments to Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom, he began experiencing undiagnosed symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. After realizing he needed help, Captain Veseth-Nelson found himself on a healing path that includes a wonderful service dog named Thor. Since retiring, he and his wife, Deanna, who also experienced his PTSD, are very active in the military community, giving speeches and holding seminars about their own experiences while encouraging service members, veterans, and families to reach out for help if needed. The duo established Invisible Wound Limited, which helps warriors suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and their vision centers on PTSD advocacy and support for warriors and their families. And now I'd like to turn the stage over to Captain Veseth-Nelson. Captain Veseth-Nelson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dawn, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself first. My name is Adrian Evan Veseth-Nelson. I'm originally from Roswell, New Mexico. As Dawn said, I graduated from the United States Military Academy in 2004. I was commissioned as an armor officer and went to Fort Knox, Kentucky. Shortly after that, I was assigned to Fort Drum, New York. 9 months later, I deployed to Iraq. I was 24 years old when I received a Bronze Star for Valor device. It's an award I never wanted, an award I never hoped to get. Because to get one of those, you got to kill someone. You have to fight. Everybody, whenever you come home, everybody asks veterans for their stories. Sometimes people ask it well, sometimes they don't. Usually when somebody asks a question that all the veterans in the audience have heard so many times, says, have you killed anybody? Usually a question to which we just shake our head or say, well, not today. Or they ask you something to the effect of, what was it like, or was it hot over there? Never questions that are terribly insightful, never really something that gets to the bottom of what our experience was like over there. We all have stories, though. Some of us have stories we will never share. Some of us have stories we do. This story that I'm about to share is one that I have shared many times before, and I would like to share it with you guys. I'm sharing this not to build my accolades, but to show where I came from and to show how damaging the invisible wounds of war are. This story is about my first deployment to Iraq when I was in Baghdad from the summer of 2005 to the summer of 2006. I have no shortage of war stories to tell during that time. I received this award for valor after a firefight with terrorists, of course, during Operation Iraqi Freedom. After securing a convoy that was ambushed, my soldiers were hit by a drive-by shooting. My wingman spotted the shooters. They were in a black sedan, just like every other car. We chased them for a little while, and they thought they'd lost us. They parked on the side of a schoolyard and thought that they had gotten away. When we came around the corner, they noticed that we were there, and they decided to do something to make us stop. They rolled down all four windows and put AK-47s and a PKM machine gun out the windows and started shooting at the kids. We had to do something. I ordered my gunner to open fire. We chased them on around crowded streets in Baghdad at a speeds in excess of 65 miles an hour for what seemed like forever. It was probably 45 seconds. It was like a movie. Here we were chasing this car through the narrow streets of Baghdad, tracers zipping both directions, smashing into the windshield of my Humvee, just inches from my face. All I could do was hope that the armored windshield of my Humvee was strong enough to keep those armor-piercing rounds away, as I could watch them embed in the acrylic and start to smoke. What seemed like hours later, but was probably only a few minutes or even seconds, my gunner ran out of ammo on his 50, and the terrorist who'd been shooting at us from the back of their car was either out of ammo or hurt. You couldn't tell. They turned a corner and had to slow down because they were coming to a crowded intersection. This was our chance. I ordered my driver to ram the car. Everyone in the truck was yelling at him to do it at once. Once we came to our senses after smashing into this four-door sedan in a 3-ton Humvee, I was pinned in my truck by the wrecked car. But the terrorists weren't. As my soldiers started to get out to go assess the casualties, I noticed that they were preparing grenades to throw at my soldiers. I used my pistol at very, very close range to kill one of the terrorists in the front seats. My sniper disintegrated the other's head, covering all of us in their brains. The survivor of the wreck was pulled out of the wreckage from the terrorist vehicle and promptly threw a grenade at one of my soldiers, hitting him square in the chest. We waited for the explosion, but later we were to find out that it was only one of the 15 grenades that they had in the car that did not have a fuse. We were lucky. Not everyone is so lucky. Slide, please. This event was probably the most traumatic event that had ever happened to me, and far more traumatic than things that happened to most people. I share this with you to tell you not to compare what roads have brought me to PTSD, but now to tell you about the after effects. This happened in January of 2006. I still had 7 months left to go in my tour, but I was a disaster. I couldn't sleep. I had nightmares all the time, and the nightmares were horrible. I was envisioning the same scenario over and over and over again, except now it was my family that were in the black car. It was my family being shot. It was people in my unit who were shot, who I was shooting in the face with my pistol over and over and over. It got to the point where I didn't want to sleep. I was afraid to sleep. And even on those rare times that I could sleep, I didn't want to. I was awake for days on end, and as a platoon leader, I started to make very, very bad decisions. I actually left being a platoon leader precisely because I was making bad decisions. I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't do. I was no longer capable of serving as an officer in the United States Army. So I moved and was off to a desk job for the remainder of the deployment. But that didn't really help. I still had my flashbacks. I still had nightmares. And the panic attacks were horrible. There's nothing worse than being on patrol in a Humvee that's already cramped and hot and having flashbacks and panic attacks, and that's what I was having. I was fortunate in that I had a very close support structure of my friends. None of us talked about PTSD. We all had it, but it was not something we didn't really know about it at that time. It was also something none of us really believed in, which now, in retrospect, that's sort of like saying you don't believe in gravity. It makes no difference. It's still there. Several months later, I came home, and I was in a daze. I moved back into my house and tried to become normal. I barely knew how to be human anymore. What I knew was that terrorists really planted IEDs in the rain. I knew it was easier to kill a person than it was to kill a dog. I knew how to fight, and I knew how to drink, and I did plenty of it. What I didn't know was that I had PTSD. Very, very bad PTSD. When I came home, I was hailed as a hero, a double-edged sword, because everybody wants to talk about it. There's lots of press, there are lots of, the bands are playing, everybody is very proud of you. But every time we have to talk about it, you have to relive it. And all I wanted to do was forget. I feel guilty. I feel guilty because I just did what I was trained to do. I feel guilty because I hurt and killed people, something that I was raised not to ever do. I feel guilty because my comrades were still over there fighting, and I wasn't, even though I knew my rotation was up, and we had another one coming 9 months later. And guilt was just the beginning. My friends and I were all hurting. We didn't know it, but we were masking the pain in unhealthy ways. I didn't know about the PTSD that I had, and I didn't know how bad it was. When we came back, we started to drink, and we kept on drinking. At first, I thought we were just having a good time and celebrating. And we were. We did have a good time for a while. We were celebrating the fact that we were alive. We were celebrating the lives of our comrades lost. We were celebrating everything we could possibly think of. One day, I don't know when it happened, the drinking got out of control. I thought we were just doing to be happy to be alive, but happy people didn't do the things that we were doing. Happy people don't keep a six-pack of beer in their office refrigerator or a flask in their car. That's people who have problems, and I knew I had a problem. About a month after I came back from Iraq, I got a dog. His name was Thor. He was a rescue from the pound. He cost me $20 because it was a kill shelter, and they were going to euthanize him that day. And they said when I went there, I looked at I looked in the cage, and everybody was barking, except for him. And I looked at him. He was big, he was awkward, and he clearly looked like he didn't belong. And I knew that I was looking at myself, and I knew that that was the dog that I wanted. I brought him home, and he absolutely saved my life. At the time, I would drink to pass out. That was the only way that I could sleep. And even when I did sleep, sleep was not exactly a restful thing because the nightmares were there. The bodies, the blood, the explosions, everything was always there. You couldn't escape it. Even during the day, the flashbacks were there, and sometimes you couldn't even tell the difference between a flashback and reality. And even when I could sleep, that small quiet was so very short-lived. And when I got Thor, I just knew for some reason that I needed a dog. I don't know where it came from, but I think perhaps part of it has to do with the fact that I had to do a lot of things with dogs over there that I was not proud of. There were several occasions when we had to slaughter feral dogs. And that always bothered me. Bothered me because dogs are not good or evil. Dogs are just animals. People can be good and evil, but people are much easier to kill than dogs. And that really reverberated with me. So when I wanted to get a dog, I think I might have been atoning a little bit for the guilt. Maybe I was just tapping into the joy I felt whenever I would go to some checkpoint in Iraq or a smaller American base that had a domesticated dog that I could pet. I remember more than once just petting a small puppy and just breaking into tears because it just made me so happy just to have that dog and just to be able to pet that dog and see and feel the connection. I've always grown up with dogs, and I know that it was universal for all of my guys. So when I got back from my tour, like I said, I wanted a dog. My wife says now that when I looked up into that cage and I picked the dog that I could relate to, I picked myself. We were both tired, and I didn't want to be anymore. I named him Thor, and I took him home that day. He was my friend, my companion, and my lifesaver ever since that day. He helped me reintegrate a little bit into society because I could take my dog for a walk. He made me take him for a walk. He was a 120-pound Akita, and he was very pushy. So if he wanted to go for a walk, he was going for a walk whether I liked it or not. And he would let me know that I needed to. He would also give me a way to reintroduce talking to people. Because when you bring your dog out, it gives you something to talk about, but at the same time, you're protected. The dog would stand between me and other people and give me something very short to talk about because you can only talk about one's dog for so long. And then we would leave. He also gave me an excuse to exercise and to get out of the house and to do something with him instead of just sitting in and drink. Also, I played with him instead of playing with a pistol. And he absolutely saved my life. He provided the companionship and the friendship that I needed when I felt very, very much alone. When you're deployed, you always have somebody watching your back. But when you come home, that's no longer the case. So it's very hard to feel comfortable, to sleep well, because you never have anybody who watches your back. Thor did that for me. I sobered up right in time for my second tour, not by choice, but because I was on a plane right back to Kuwait. My second tour to Iraq was long, 15 months, with none of the action of the first tour, but entirely too much time to think. And thinking was the last thing I wanted or needed to do. I was angry, I was dangerous, I had a lot of guns, and I was alone. I wouldn't sleep for days on end, and then I would sleep for days. I lifted weights all the time. That's all I did, fueled by hate. I hated the world. The only thing I had that helped were the dogs. They played a huge role in our second tour in Iraq. We had a few who lived on our team compound. Some ran with us, some exercised with us, some protected us from the feral ones that we would shoot otherwise. Dogs kept us going over there. They somehow bridged the gap between war and home and comforted us in a way that we couldn't explain. One day, towards the end of my second tour, my boss pulled me into the office and told me that I had a problem and I needed to get help and that it was not an option. He told me the Adrian he used to see was not the one that he was seeing now and that I was on a path towards destruction. I knew he was right. I had all the symptoms of PTSD and I saw them. The behavioral and psychological symptoms like disturbed sleep, fluctuating weight, extreme rage and anger, hypervigilance, flashbacks were all there. My first response to any threat was to fight. I even pulled a pistol a couple times on my Iraqi counterpart and threatened to kill him. My depression and anxiety were absolutely crippling. I would just sleep for days. I had a lot of trouble going on missions, and one day when I was gunning, I even nearly killed the Iraqi brigade civil affairs officer that I was working with because I couldn't get in my mind that we were under new rules of engagement, where I was the second time in Kirkuk in 2008, and it was a very different time and a much safer time than Baghdad was in 2005. When I got back to Fort Drum, New York in October of 2009, I finally asked for help during our redeployment processing that every soldier who comes home goes through. At the end of the day, having filled out the form that every soldier gets, and having checked every single block on that form that asked me if I'd killed anyone or witnessed anyone being killed, except for the one that said I've been exposed to nerve gas, I checked every one of them, and nobody said so much as a word as I was getting ready to leave. I decided that this was the time, and that if I didn't do something now, I never would, and I didn't know what would happen. I walked back to the psych training guys and told them that I had PTSD and I needed help. The two young soldiers were totally confused. Apparently nobody had ever asked them for help. I told them that I would wait until they figured it out. Apparently at 6'4" and 270 pounds with a 19-inch neck, I was pretty convincing because 20 minutes later, I had my first experience with mental health. I went home to Thor, who had lived with my brother over the deployment, who most of the time felt like my only friend. Not just his presence, but his quiet companionship. I saved him, yes, that's very true. They were going to euthanize him that day, but he also saved my life, twice. He made me do something other than drink. I had to exercise him. He was a big dog, and he was pretty convincing. I had to feed him, groom him, walk him. Even though I wanted to stay inside my house with the shades drawn and a shotgun and a bottle of tequila in my hands, I had to get out because Thor made me. He knew what it felt like to be locked up in a prison, and he wasn't going to do it with me. He had other plans. On the battlefield, everyone has a battle buddy. In combat, this buddy watches your back and checks things so you don't have to. And he has your back no matter what. This is the one person you have to rely on for your life, and vice versa. When the rattle of shells falling has stopped, and the deafening quiet of my house, where the noise of my thoughts deafened me and I was afraid to sleep, Thor became my battle buddy. I walked and played with him instead of fingering the trigger of my pistol. He gave me a way out and allowed me to become human again, slowly, bit by bit. Soon, I learned that there were many veterans, my friends, people in therapy groups with me that had similar experiences with their dogs. One confided in me that he was about to shoot himself. He had the gun in his hand when his dog walked in and dropped the ball in his lap. He thought to himself, I have a responsibility. Who's going to play with my dog? I have to be alive to take care of him. Whatever works, dogs work. Last year, Thor was well into his training for public access. We were able to travel with him, making life bearable for me. He and I were hiking in the New Mexico mountains with my father when, unbeknownst to us, a rattlesnake was under a bush waiting silently in the middle of the trail. It did not rattle. Thor seized the rattlesnake and killed it before we stepped right on top of it. He saved both my and my father's lives. He would have never made it back in time if either me or my father had gotten bitten. We were over 10 miles from the car in the middle of the desert, 30 miles from the nearest hospital. He saved my life the second time that day. That's the day he died. He was bitten 6 times. He was my battle buddy that day, until the end. I miss Thor. He's the reason I'm here talking to you today. But what Thor's most important contribution was is that he taught me if he could help me, maybe other people could benefit from a battle buddy too. So although he is lost, So although where he lost against the rattlesnake there is a memorial, the biggest tribute to him and to every dog that a human has loved is creating a program like this to help others and to help rescue. Last year, I was admitted to a specialized care program clinic at Walter Reed that specialized in treating TBI and PTSD. This event changed my life and helped me actually move on a path to recovery instead of downhill. I have been in single and group therapy. I've done acupuncture, yoga, meditation, you name it, I've done it. I've taken handfuls of pills at a time, and I still do. I would have juggled if I had to. Anything at all for peace of mind, to slow my mind down, to get the bad memories to leave me alone, to be able to not be afraid to sleep, and to be able to feel again. I'm still not there yet. I'm getting there. My wife and I, shortly after my dog died, were ready to adopt another member of our family. Not to fill the void of Thor, which could never be filled, but for something to share our love for. And we couldn't help it. We love dogs. We got Loki, a beautiful Akita who starts her battle buddies training on Sunday. Mythology shows that Thor, the Norse god of thunder, was a hero, was killed by a serpent, which led to his demise and the world's demise. Like Thor, ironically, Loki is the trickster, a thief, and a mischievous Norse god. I'm not sure what I've gotten myself into with this one. Perhaps it's not the best namesake in the world. But for the first time in a long time, I have hope, and I'm excited to find out. I'm telling all of you this, not to depress you, but to let you guys know that there is hope. And dogs have done amazing things for me. I know they can do amazing things for a lot of people. And if they don't work, try something else. There's always something, and there's always hope. With that, Dawn, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Be hard-pressed to say, sorry, that I wasn't impacted by your story, and hope that some of our participants can relate, and that your story will encourage others to seek the help that they need. And this last slide I have of yours, I understand, is Thor. So with that, I thank him and I thank you.